All right, hello, and welcome back on a Wednesday here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm now joined old friend, Peach State Life, back in the home state, Mr. Wes Blakenship of DawgsHQ. West, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you, Chase. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here, man. What is Peach State Life? Where is that from?
Peach State Light, actually.
Oh, Light. Okay.
Yeah, it does look like an F. One of my buddies named Jake Sapp is launching a beer here in Athens, and it's a pretty simple goal of his. He doesn't want to scale to the level of, launching a bunch of different brews and pilsners and lagers and all that stuff. He just wants to do one beer really well, and I invite anyone who's in the Athens, Georgia, Northeast Georgia area to check them out. They're pretty good, and Jake's a good guy, so I wanted to support him. I'm a big fan of local businesses and big fan of Athens stuff, so here we are.
There you go. Same here in
Knoxville.
Beer,
too. I like beer. So
well, there you go. Wes, you and the good folks over there at DawgsHQ, you're having to weather a little bit of a storm here over the week. You got Joel Klatt, eyes just peered right towards the dogs, and what Kirby said following the dogs escaping with a victory in Columbia. With, you're getting this is the best place to be, I think, when just being a fan, is when, especially in college football, is that you've reached the pinnacle. Everyone has established that you are the top dog, pardon the pun there.
Yeah.
And that when you can say, and this, whether it's true or not, we're going to get everyone's best game week over week, that's a great place to be, because it's not true. It's not reality. It's not like everyone's going to get up, because there's the flip side where I'm certain there are a lot of locker rooms when they got the dogs on the schedule, they're looking at it and they're going, man, this sucks. I'm not looking forward to this one, and knowing that it's going to go a certain way. But the idea that you're just getting everybody's best game week over week is just kind of silly. But I do think it's fascinating, and it adds another element to what we thought was going to be Georgia coasting to another undefeated regular season, and it doesn't seem to be. With the last 2 weeks, it's going to be as just easy as many of us may have predicted before the season. But as someone who has watched every minute of the Dogs the last 2 weeks, what is real and what is just false in terms of the narrative surrounding Georgia escaping the last 2 weeks?
Well, I think Georgia's kind of been a victim of the narratives that the media has created. Look, I work in the media, but entering the season, I certainly didn't expect this Georgia team to go undefeated in the regular season, just because it's so difficult to do it. And it's a younger team. And now, they go out and blow out Oregon, get everybody's attention. They start super fast. And then, the last couple weeks, Kent State, Missouri, you've seen Georgia's, less than their best effort, and against Missouri, their worst effort. But Missouri also had nothing to lose in that game, and that's what you were talking about, Chase, about teams giving Georgia their best game. Missouri could afford to blitz Stetson Bennett on every snap, because why not? Why not do it? Why not go cover zero? Why not blitz 6 guys? Why not blitz 7? I think they did that a couple times too. So, there's a lot of things going on. But one good game against Oregon did not mean that Georgia was going to go undefeated. But because Georgia had just won the national championship game, and that's their first game out, is against a Power 5 opponent who's currently in the top 15, and you blow them out, then all of a sudden people immediately think, oh, wow, Georgia's back. But even with that being said, I think our staff, our crew at DawgsHQ has been pretty measured. We didn't get too over the top about the predictions that the national media did. So now, you hear guys like Joel Klatt. He's a smart dude. He knows the sport, but he doesn't cover Georgia day in and day out. All he can react to is what everyone's been saying the first 3-4 weeks of the season, is that Georgia is, destined to repeat, destined to run the table, destined to beat everybody by double digits. When I think if you are really looking at the team objectively, that wasn't necessarily going to be the case, and a young team was going to have to learn some hard lessons that guys like Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis learned when they played. They didn't just hop on the scene and beat everybody and dominate everybody. They had tough games at Alabama where they lost in 2020. They had tough games against Florida. They had a bad game against South Carolina in 2019. And this group of Georgia players has to learn some of those lessons. Will they lose doing it? We'll see. But they definitely escaped with the win against Missouri.
Interesting. I don't think the Vols will be doing any cover zero when they come to Athens, just as a heads up. I don't think we're putting Kamal Haddon and Christian Charles and Brandon Turnage on an island like that.
Worked for Mizzou.
It did, but I don't think that's going to be the case. What is so do they have real problems, though? You mentioned the age, you mentioned that. Like, is there something that you're seeing the last 2 weeks outside of the age part of it that you're like, okay, whether it's a position group, whether it's just how teams are defending Georgia now, which might be a little bit different than what it was a year ago? Is there something with Stetson? Like, where is it just the uncertainty out wide outside of Brock Bowers and company? Like, is there something that's real that actually is concerning that you're kind of wondering if they can clean up in the middle of the season?
I think if there's an area where they're actually lacking, it's the ability for skilled players who aren't Brock Bowers or Darnell Washington to get separation and get open. And that was a huge contributing factor of why Missouri was able to get so much pressure on Stetson. A lot of people pointed to the offensive line. Yeah, they had a bad game, but they haven't had a bad season. They had a bad game. Missouri punched him in the mouth, and Stetson had to hold the ball a lot longer because no one could get open. So it made for a pretty vicious cycle of doom for Georgia in Columbia this past Saturday. If they can get some guys back, if they can find ways to mix up the offense, make it move a little quicker, and that's what Georgia did late in the game when they needed those touchdown drives. They moved the ball quickly. They didn't wait for plays to develop too long. They went pop, pop, pop. Let's just move down the field. And Stetson had a bad game, but I'm still not concerned about Stetson Bennett and his leadership role in the team. It's the same thing as last season. The difference that he has over his backup, last season it was JT Daniels, this season it's Carson Beck, is his mobility and his ability to scramble, his ability to make things happen with his feet. So as long as that's the case for Stetson Bennett, he's still QB1. I mean, there's no quarterback controversy in Athens yet, and I don't expect there to be. But if there's anything, even on a bad day for Stetson, that is encouraging for his role on the team, it's the fact that when Georgia needed touchdown drives, he led the team on touchdown drives, just like he did in the national championship game. I know Missouri's not Alabama. It's not the national championship. But when you need your quarterback to do that on the road in the SEC, if he steps up, he's probably your starter. And if he doesn't, maybe you need to re-examine some things.
That's more than fair. And I agree. And I think I've kind of flipped. What's funny is I kind of have grouped Stetson and Hooker in the same group for the most of the season coming into this year, where Rattler and Levis were just the national folks who were like, oh, the theoretical great SEC quarterbacks. They have the size. Anthony Richardson also thrown into this group where it's just all sounds great in theory. And then Hendon Hooker, 46 touchdowns, 2 picks, just doesn't turn the ball over, takes a beating, not flashy, not going to be a first-round guy. Stetson not going to be a first-round guy. But they're efficient, and they just don't lose football games. They don't cost you football games. And I think through and through, I mean, there is a reason that both of these schools are still undefeated on October 5th. And the other 3 schools with Rattler, with Levis, who had a big turnover late in that loss in Oxford on Saturday, and also Richardson, who, showed a lot, but against Tennessee in Knoxville, but still just not quite there. And I think Stetson Bennett is far from the problem in Athens, and you saw that in the second half, I think, for sure. When you look at, though, I'm curious, which position group is youth and inexperience the biggest problem for the Dogs right now, Wes?
Uh, as far as being healthy and relying on guys that haven't played much, it's the defensive line. With Jalen Carter being injured for the next couple weeks, out indefinitely, it's not so much that the guys there are young, they just didn't play a ton in meaningful moments because Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt were playing and Jalen Carter was playing, even though he's still around, not part of that NFL draft exodus. But now you're looking at guys like Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, Tramel Walthour, Tyron Ingram Dawkins. These are guys that are not household names yet. They haven't earned that right. And they're still figuring out how to dominate and create opportunities for the linebackers behind them. And I'm not saying they're doing a poor job, but when you look at what left Georgia last season and which group is expected to still, in a Kirby Smart defense, dominate at the line of scrimmage, I think that by the end of the year, they'll have it figured out. But right now, they're still, I would say, a step behind in some cases, the production you saw. And that's what's been the theme of Kirby Smart's defense. You go back to his first couple years in Athens. You had Roquan Smith taking advantage of a dominant defensive line in front of him, almost working the way an offensive line clears holes for a running back. Georgia's defensive line kind of clears holes for its linebackers to do whatever they want to do. You can't do that in the SEC if you're not very physical and very confident in what you're doing. So as Georgia's D-line gets better and better as the season goes along, I think you'll see Georgia's defense be a little bit quicker to some of these plays. They've had some busts the last couple weeks, some long runs. Had that against Missouri, but a freshman, Malachi Starks, had arguably a game-saving tackle because he tackles the running back at the 1-yard line, and Georgia holds Mizzou to a field goal, and the Dogs end up winning. And if that's a touchdown and everything goes the way it went the rest of the game, which isn't how football works, but, potentially save Georgia's butt there. So, yeah, a lot of youth on the defense. We all knew that. I think they're still playing better than we thought, but maybe, the last couple weeks you've seen teams break some explosive plays. Maybe offensive coordinators are starting to see some ways to take advantage of this inexperienced defense, and they're doing that a lot with pre-snap stuff. Kent State did it in a very unique way. Lia Drinkowitz is very good at it as well. So if there's something to attack this Georgia defense, it's probably before the snap even happens right now, while they still try to figure out how to play at game speed.
The biggest difference between the Kent State and Mizzou game was what?
I would say Georgia's ability to get better as the game went along. Kent State was just, let's just survive. This team's coming here, noon kick, didn't really get too excited to play them, and they're going to be pesky, and we're just going to have to stay and grind and make sure that we don't lose this one. I think Georgia legitimately grew up against Missouri in a way that trailing by 10 points on the road in the SEC, it's the only way you can learn that kind of lesson. And they really should have lost that game. I mean, Georgia had some breaks when it comes to officiating. Georgia had some moments where Missouri maybe got a little too conservative late in that game, where if they continued to attack, Mizzou could have pulled away. So I think Georgia had a scare, no doubt, but it was a scare that was legitimate. Kent State was a scare in the way that it was annoying, but you knew Georgia was going to win the game. Even the Samford game, Georgia won 33-0, but they didn't play their best ball. You could say there was some adversity in that one too, because Georgia wasn't as efficient, wasn't executing as well as it could. But Mizzou was a legitimate scare, and I think that's what makes it different. Georgia had to go out there and make some plays to win. They started out the game almost looking like they thought they could show up and win, and that wasn't the case. And a lot of young players learned that lesson the hard way.
How is Stetson different this year? What have you noticed you've jotted down that looks different, that's something he's clearly worked on this offseason to prepare him to defend this title this year? What have you noticed?
Well, I think it's what you said earlier. He's not making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because he knows he's QB1, and he's less likely to force things in there. He's less likely to go out there and try to prove something to everybody. He doesn't have to do that. He had a big scramble against Oregon that resulted in a cool Johnny Football-esque touchdown pass against the Oregon defense, but he really hasn't scrambled much since then. And I think Kirby Smart is really hammering home, hey, you've got this in your bag. Let's not use it every time, though. Use it when you really need to, because we can't afford you to go out there and try something that we don't need you to try. His only pick on the season was against Kent State, and even that, it appeared as if there was a mix-up in the route running. Receiver maybe could have come back to the ball a little bit more than he did, so even that wasn't necessarily a bad decision. It was just a play that was made by the other team. So, look, Stetson's being smarter with the ball, and that's the one thing that Kirby said he wanted to see from Stetson. Now, the caveat there, the flip side of that is, if you're Kirby Smart, you don't want to limit Stetson too much now. That's his X factor, is his unpredictability. So I'd be cautious about that if I were Kirby. And look, I'm not paid the big bucks to be the head coach like he is, but I also wonder if trying to keep Stetson in between the pocket too much could potentially limit him. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on as the season goes along.
Who is most likely to break out at the wide receiver spot this year?
Well, it's an old name. It's not a young freshman that's emerging as a former recruit that was playing high school last season. It's not that kind of deal for me right now anyway. I think it's Dominic Blaylock, and he had some tough injury luck early on in his career, tore his ACL twice. But this season, he has really stepped up when Georgia needs him the most. And A.D. Mitchell's been out essentially since the Oregon game. He played one snap against Samford and came out with an ankle injury. Arian Smith is another guy they're trying to keep healthy, but he just has terrible luck, it seems like, at staying healthy. But Dom Blaylock is the guy right now for me that is the name that I didn't expect to be a huge factor for Georgia right now, but he has been incredibly reliable and dependable for Stetson when it matters the most.
Interesting. I said all year, where I was like, before the year, I thought if Georgia got tripped up, it would be at Mississippi State. Like, that was the one I had circled, where it's like, if they drop one in the regular season, based on what we saw a couple years ago when Will Rogers was a freshman, we know the record for Mike Leach winning 9 games.
He's the best quarterback in the country right now out of the SEC.
He's the what?
He's got the most yards right now.
He does have the most yards. Best QBR, though, and the best quarterback, I would still say, in the SEC right now might be Mr. Hendon Hooker over here in Knoxville, Tennessee. I might lean that one, but I'm okay. Right. I'm okay with either. But they're efficient. They're winning football games. They blow out Texas A&M over the weekend. But I'm curious, based on what you've seen from your Dogs and what you've seen from Mississippi State and what you've seen from Tennessee to this point, who are you more concerned about matchup-wise for Georgia this fall?
None of them. Kentucky is the one I said.
Are you really still that concerned?
Coming into the season, yeah, Ole Miss is really good, and Kentucky played them tough. And was it a great game for Kentucky? No, but I still think they're a legitimate threat. I think one loss doesn't do you in the SEC, and the reason that Kentucky, to me, is still the biggest threat for Georgia is because it's on the road, and they gave Georgia the toughest test of any team they played last season. And look, I know it's a different team this year, but Kentucky gave Georgia a really tough test in Athens. Now they get them in Lexington, and if they continue to get better with Rodriguez back in that backfield, I still think Kentucky can give Georgia a lot of trouble just because of how physical they are. What really gave Georgia fits against Missouri? It wasn't Missouri streaking downfield and playing basketball on grass. It was their defense playing physical. It was a lack of competition at the line of scrimmage. And if you're able to out-physical Georgia, which is what they want to do better than anybody, if you're able to go toe-to-toe with them physically, then I think you have a really good chance. And that's why I still think, even though Mississippi State and Tennessee have a tremendous offense and passing attack, I don't know about them defensively. And I think Kentucky's recruited pretty well. They've recruited some good depth. As the season goes along, I expect them to continue to get better. I'm not saying I'm not worried about Tennessee for Georgia's sake. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying comparatively, I still expect Kentucky to give Georgia a really tough game in Lexington.
Interesting. Yeah, like I've just the matchup's not good. I think when they come to Knoxville at the end of October, like I would be surprised if Tennessee doesn't win by three scores. Would probably be my guess on that one. They're just a bad matchup, and like Tennessee owns that history. You go through the past time. There's something about it, and it makes it even sweeter when you go into Kentucky and take the state's best player in the recruiting class. Shout out to Christian Conyer. It's a nice one for next year's class. Last thing, West, of the SEC teams this year, who have you been most surprised by? It could be in a positive way or in a negative way. Who have you been most surprised by in the SEC?
Probably Ole Miss. And I know I just spoke about them. I'm not really too surprised that A&M is struggling to field a 9-10 win season. I think before the season you thought they'd probably be somewhere around 8-4, and looks like they're kind of trending that way, maybe even worse. But for Ole Miss to be as dominant, explosive on both sides of the ball as they've shown so far, that was a bit of a surprise to me. I certainly didn't think they'd be terrible by any means, but it looks like Bama's going to have a real test taking on Ole Miss this season. So that's been my big surprise, the Lane Train.
We'll end on this, Wes. We both love high school football. We went to two powerhouses back in the state of Georgia, Parkview and the Collins Hill Eagles. Your Collins Hill Eagles win the state title last year. Travis Hunter, shout out to Sam Horn, Travis Hunter, and those guys. But I don't know if you've checked out the GHSA schedule, Wes. The Collins Hill Eagles, Region 8, 2-4, now sharing a region with Buford, which I think probably blows your mind too, that they are now a 7A school. When we grew up, when they were, 2, 3A?
Well, it's about time, yeah. And I think it's about time they did that because it never really seemed fair. But yeah, no. I mean, they've taken advantage of it and made the most of that opportunity, and Collins Hill's having a rebuilding year. Just high school football's tough to stay on top like that. But yeah, tough year for the Eagles, but can't take that state championship away from them.
You cannot. Well, we'll see what happens to Parkview. 5-1. Shout out to Coach Godfrey and the Parkview Panthers. We're back.
Are back.
Yeah, I mean, everything's coming up Parkview right now. Matt Olson, Parkview.
That's right. Go Braves.
Go Braves. All right, Wes. Well, how do the good folks support you and the team and everything you guys have got going on over at DawgsHQ this week?
I invite everyone to take advantage of our premium subscription over at DawgsHQ. If you're a Georgia fan and want the latest inside scoop in recruiting news, team injury news, updates, we got a $1 for 1 year promo going on. That won't last forever, so go check that out. And I specifically lead our YouTube efforts over at DawgsHQ. Just started that up with a real emphasis on that in my role. So go over there and hit the subscribe button if you don't want to pay $1 for a premium membership.
No, you should pay the $1. Like, I got it for VolQuest and everything else. Go do it. Go pay it.
The YouTube's free, so go hit subscribe on that too. Thanks, Chase.
Absolutely. Thank you. And keep up the good work, my friend. And we'll have to check back in again soon.
Sounds good, man. Catch you soon.